Concrete and steel in higher buildings has much higher greenhouse gas. The theory is it lasts longer, but I don't know, these wooden houses, I was just in New England, those seem to be doing pretty well. Sustainably managed forestry, which we've more or less ended in California. Commercial forestry is a shadow of its former self. We import cement from China, which is ridiculous at every level, but that's another kind of distortion caused by our environmental and climate leaders, which is to pick a greenhouse gas reduction metric that just ignores what we import. And so to run a cement plant right next to limestone and ship it 50 miles to a city that needs it, and on the way employ 50 people who need a job, that's a massive greenhouse gas emitter because you need energy to make cement. On the other hand, that same cement, if it's mined and made in China with typically a coal-based power grid, and then shipped across the Pacific Ocean, and then landed in a port full of folks who are already exposed to more emissions than people who don't live near ports or freeways, and then ship it to that same office tower in downtown LA, our climate and environmental leaders call that zero greenhouse gas cement. And they don't take into account the cost implications of that kind of policy, the equity implications. I mean, we're very focused, it's a progressive single-party state virtually, very focused on issues like worker protection and LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter, and the environment. But apparently, we only care just a tiny, tiny bit about that because the cement example alone demonstrates that we seem to be just fine with virtual slave labor in a carbon-based economy, shipping with bunker fuel cement to California. That's ridiculous. If you come from a landowning family, the odds are the next generation will be a landowning family. And if you don't, then you won't. And we have plenty of examples of, folks who are earning what in other states would be considered a pretty solid income. We have a statewide median income of nearly $100,000, ranges from around 60 in some of the poorer counties to 130 or so in Silicon Valley. And medians are always tricky statistics because they're distorted by our billionaire class. Most people, if they earn $100,000, $110,000, $120,000, would view themselves as easily middle class and homeowners. In California, without a massive infusion of cash for a down payment, homeownership is out of reach for that income level, which is really bad because, of course, homeownership has been intentionally made out of reach for decades based on redlining and other civil rights, kind of Jim Crow era abuses, and now that's just perpetuating. We all learned in school that slaves were freed as of the Civil War, and after we freed slaves in the Civil War, we no longer had this stain of slavery. But that stain of slavery was replaced by a series of what were called Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow laws were designed to skate right at the edge of what's legal and still maintain rigid segregation. So separate but equal schools is an example of a Jim Crow system that was absolutely enacted by legislatures and enforced by administration. In the housing arena, we had a few different kinds of tools. One, which was probably the most egregious, was this notion of redlining, where really the whole concept of buying a home with mortgages only worked because the mortgages were backed by the federal government. But for the federal government's backing of those mortgages, why would you trust someone to be able to make 30 years worth of payments on a home? Why would you take that risk as a bank? So federal mortgage insurance was how we became a nation of homeowners. And that mortgage insurance was simply not available in mapped areas that were predominantly Black or minority, Chinese, Latino. It was other Asian. It was an intentional, we don't want to extend homeownership to these population groups. And then there were other kind of on the supply side, tools like requiring homes to be larger or on larger lots, or imposing high fees on the building of homes that really created exclusive white neighborhoods. And if you were confused about what was intended initially, those had racial exclusions as well that forbade the sale or occupancy of those homes by minority community members. So the exclusionary racial zoning or covenants were eventually wiped out by courts, but that use of intentional zoning into high-cost home products continues to this day. And that has both suppressed supply as well as made relatively few places where it's possible for communities of color to have lived for some period of time. And now, of course, add insult to injury, those are the original Jim Crow laws. Green Jim Crow says, well, actually, those majority-minority communities are in terrific urban locations with transit. We want more housing built there. And so what are we building but mid and high-rise products that cost $4,000 or more a month to rent. And then there's displacement of communities of color to exurban locations or out of the region or out of the state. The Bay Area is now more racially segregated than it was in 1965, which is an astonishing outcome of green Jim Crow, which is really using this notion of the environment and now climate, to shove people out of legacy communities of color.